Welcome to City States Prototype Board Game. You can see the action card in front of you. On the top left, it has an influence cost to play, and on the bottom right, it has the influence cost to purchase. These are two different values. In the bottom middle, it has text denoting its effects, such as influence plus slew, which increases your influence. In the upper bound of that, there's an empty space in the middle that is to be used for art later on. Currently, it's artless, but we can change that later on. The card typing, such as military type card, will be denoted by colors, but for now it is colorless to make it flexible to fix within the prototype. These are the current version of tokens to make it playable. Later on, I have plans to make use of better materials, but for playtesting this is currently enough. There are three types of tokens: military, gold, and religion, each denoted by their own symbol, which is shield, dollar, and cross. This is how you place the components to set up the game. This is the influence market, where it's available every game. This is where you place and buy influence card important for your game plans. These are the pile of tokens. The tokens are split into three types, going with the according respective resource. You are limited by the number of tokens in this pile, therefore you cannot exceed it. This is the action markets. This is where you place all the action cards to be bought and drafted and played throughout the game. If you see here, this is the starting cards. You don't put these starting cards in this position, but these are the starting cards each player should have in the beginning of the game. This is the drafting phase. Here you take two of each card in the market and then shuffle them face down. Then you draw a number of cards into an empty space. This number equals to the number of players times 4. The remainder of the cards are then placed back into the market. Each player takes a card in a clockwise manner. When the last player takes a card, he then takes another one, and then it rotates in an anti-clockwise manner. It then goes back to a clockwise manner. Repeat until each player draws 4 cards. Each player then incorporates the drafted cards and then shuffles their own decks. They then draw 5 cards. The tokens are now dealt. 5 tokens of each type are given to each player. After everything of the above is completed, now we can begin to start the game. When a player's turn begins, he starts by playing influence cards in the influence phase. He then calculates the total influence from this phase. He then chooses to buy as many cards as his influence allows. This is optional, he can buy none if he so chooses. Afterwards is the play action phase. He has the same amount of influence as obtained from the influence phase. He then chooses to play cards as much as his influence allows. Finally, the game ends when 3 piles of the cards on the board have run out. This is the master spreadsheet where I save all the data regarding all the cards and all their effects and all their types and etc. It also contains all the glossary so that it's to clarify all the information needed for this game. As for the test play results, firstly, the average game time is found to be around 40 to 45 minutes with variance. It's actually it could be as low as 20 minutes and like as high as 60. Why is that? Because I think it promotes different strategies. We tried situations where everyone just kept buying cards and you could go as quickly as 20 minutes because you just run out. Or you just slow down and then just slowly win, and that takes around 60 even. Another interesting feedback that I got was trying to add another winning condition, and I think he suggested that I add the winning condition that is when one of the total tokens run out. And I think that's an interesting idea because it promotes different strategies as well. I'm not sure about implementing that yet, but this is interesting enough that I might implement it eventually. Some cards were found to be overbought, namely OMLT minus 3, which is really, really strong. The first playthrough, it was alright because you're playing 2 players, but then as you add more players to the mix, it actually becomes more and more powerful. And I think because of that, I've nerfed it so that it's actually MLT minus 2. As such, other players only lose 2 of the MLT instead of 3. Some cards I found to be underbought instead, like this card that is influence plus 5. Why is that? I think it's because it's super expensive right now in the bottom right. But I think that's okay because these type of cards enable cards that are more expensive later on along the line. So I think right now I'm not going to nerf or change it at this moment because it might be useful for more expensive cards to be placed into the game later on. After receiving feedback regarding some of the keywords such as MLT, INF, and OMLT, I've decided to change some of those visuals so that it's more fitting. Firstly, you can see at the top right, now there's a typing of the card so that you can now tell what type of card it is. And then in the middle, I changed some of the symbols such as INF into this triangular symbol such that it's consistent throughout the game and easier to remember. This also applies to other symbols such as GLD becoming a gold symbol and so on and so forth. So then this makes it easier for people to see. Also, I changed some of the tokens such that it used to be made of paper, flimsy, and not tactile, and now I've used the leftover cards and cut it into bits and pieces, and then used that as the tokens instead, which makes it more tactile to hold and much more comfortable to distribute. As I explained the mechanics on how to play the game and the feedback given from the playtesting, now it's time to pitch the game and why I think it's a good game that can succeed. First of all, there's already a market for this type of game, as proven by the game that inspired it, Dominion. It's already hugely popular and like everyone kind of knows it at this point. But City States adds its own mechanics inside it to make it feel unique, such as the 3 resource management, and it's the initial draft page to make it a different game. There's already games like Tanto Core that mimic it with different themes, so I think there's a place for this game too. It appeals to explorers because the basic nature of deck building games allows for variety and a range of events that can happen in game. Almost all of which is in the player's hands to change, and therefore they have the capabilities of changing the outcomes depending on what they want. Although there are RNG in this game, which creates some variance. There are also multiple ways to win that is not necessarily in conflict with another's goals, and therefore you have to take into consideration what your fellow players are doing. Next, I designed this game as a good base to start with, therefore it is easily expandable for further modernization. Simply, we can add more cards to add a great number of game variants. These card types can vary too, from reactive cards to counter reaction cards, and then until all the way to continuous cards that stay longer, and then maybe cooperative cards that can only be played if another player have the same card. I haven't implemented this yet, but this is possibilities. It's also possible to add event cards maybe, or maybe themes such as the Greek states of Thebes, Athens, and Sparta to make it more interesting. Modifiers might also be added to incentivize a particular build, such as maybe MLT at this point is doubled, for example. Although not implemented yet, this just shows the potential for future development. Thank you for listening, and I hope you find this concept as interesting as I do.